Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us, and I'm very excited to host this Science Policy Interface online webinar today on biodiversity and pandemics, realizing the interdisciplinary research and promoting action priorities. So we've got a very exciting agenda here today, and I would like to welcome you all, the participants, the speakers and panelists, to this webinar. I would like to remind you that this will be recorded and it will be later uploaded to the Alternet website. So the way that we are going to do this is that we will have the possibility for all the participants to interact with the rest of the group and the presenters via the Q&A function. So please send your questions and anything you would like to add to the Q&A, and you can also there vote on other people's questions. We will do the best from the kind of Alternet and Eklipse team to answer your questions throughout the webinar, and there will be a dedicated Q&A session as well. Yeah, so Candice, could I have a look at the agenda, please, and let people know what the plan is? There we go. So this is the agenda for today's webinar. We will have an opening from Jeske van Dijk. We will have an introductory note by Cristina Fantazzi from the European Commission. We will have a presentation from Julie Shapiro about the results and recommendations from the expert working group. And we will have a panel discussion and a closure address. It will be moderated by Alistair Scott, and the closure will be presented by Serge Mohan. So, as I said, the opening, we are looking forward to hear from Jeske van Dijk, who is a senior researcher at the Norwegian Institute for Nature Research in Norway, and she is the Alternet Council chair. She has been involved in Alternet as a coordinator and chair of the Alternet Management Board since 2009. She's a natural scientist working and focusing on carnivores and wildlife conflicts, and her expertise is in dialogue processes for conflict transformation. You will see in the chat as well a short summary, a kind of short bio about Jeske. So I'll give the floor to you, Jeske.
I think I'm with my camera on. Thank you, Niels, for this introduction, and thank you, Niels and the Eklipse team for inviting me to give a short introduction about Alternet and Eklipse. First of all, we celebrate our 20th anniversary this year in 2024. We started in 2004 as an network of excellence. I will say a little bit more about it later. At the moment, we have 33 institutes, partner institutes, from 21 countries in Europe. And our aim is to integrate our research capability to assess changes in biodiversity, analyzes these effects on ecosystem services and society, and inform public and policymakers about this at the European scale. So we are transdisciplinary and transdisciplinary in nature and interdisciplinary. We have joint collaboration between natural and social scientists. And we support, for instance, the platform Eklipse for high impact interactions with policymakers, the scientific community, and the public. What we do, we have several activities within the Alternet network. One of them is the Eklipse mechanism. Another one is that we host the Alternet Summer School in Peresque in southern France. It's providing training for young researchers in interdisciplinary approaches to biodiversity and ecosystem. We've done this since 2006, and we now also incorporate transformative change in this. We have a biannual alternate conferences that we organize. We have a call for collaborative initiatives. Also this year we will come out with a call in which we give support, financial support to collaborative initiatives. And we have a call exchange that enables international consortium building and internal sharing of funding opportunities. And we support the LTR Europe network. But most of all, we have established a vibrant international and interdisciplinary ecosystem and biodiversity research community. So a little bit about the history. As said, we started in 2004 as a European Network of Excellence with funding from the European Commission till 2009. Then between 2009 and 2013, we had funding from the Norwegian government, the Research Council of Norway, in which we coordinated further and the alternate network activities. And since then, we have been up and going, running the alternate network, with a slight change in 2020 that we became a INGO network, an independent organization by Belgium law that enables Eklipse to be part of Alternet, and that also enables us to have European projects, among others. One of these European projects we have, or that Eklipse has at the moment, is Restorite and EcoReady, for instance. Apart from the EU projects, Eklipse has also done several requests in the past and currently ongoing. One of them is the macroalgae cultivation that was paid by DG Mare. This one, Biodiversity and Pandemics, which you will hear more about, also paid by the European Commission. The mitigation hierarchy, we have had a request on from the OFB, the Office Français de la Biodiversité, and for instance, transformative change and how to embed this in the global biodiversity framework, which was also supported by the European Commission. So as you see, it's very important that that Eklipse is part of Alternet, to especially bridge the gaps between science and policy. Niels, I would like to leave it at that.
Thank you very much, Jitka. That was very interesting and gave us, I think, all a good overview of what Alternet and Eklipse do and how they work together. So next on my agenda, I would like to welcome Christina Pontazzi from the European Commission's Director General for Research and Innovation. And you will find a short bio about Christina in the chat. And Christina, I would like to give the floor to you.
Thank you very much, Niels. So first of all, let me thank Alternet and Eklipse for inviting me to be part of this webinar. Happy to be here with you today. So just to introduce a bit myself, I am the policy officer in DG Research and Innovation of the European Commission, following the area of biodiversity and health. And it was mainly us in RTD, together with other colleagues of the Commission, who formulated this request to Eklipse for the preparation of this report that will be presented and discussed today on biodiversity and pandemics. So I was asked, and I'll be happy to give you some background on the reasons we have decided to make this request. So as we all know, the nexus between biodiversity and health is very important. It's a crucial area recognized not only by the biodiversity strategy 2030, but also from the GBF, the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework that was adopted recently, which explicitly recognizes the interlinkages between biodiversity and health, referencing One Health as an overarching consideration for all targets. And for these reasons, biodiversity and health is a topic that has been included in the scope of Horizon Europe. I suppose that you're all familiar with Horizon Europe is the main funding program for research and innovation we have in the European Union. And under this big fund, we have funded a number of projects in this field, in biodiversity and pandemics, zoonotic diseases, where we have started having great results, promising outputs. We have managed, and we continue, of course, bringing researchers together from different EU countries, but also from third countries, which is really important if we really want to dig into the subject of biodiversity and pandemics, and to learn more on how they emerge and the ways to prevent them. So Horizon Europe is funding through its different work programs several projects on biodiversity and pandemics and the relationship between biodiversity and zoonotic diseases. And we also have the Biodiversity Partnership you might be familiar with, where over there again we have funded several projects on the issue. But despite of all this, we also know in the Commission that this is an area where we have knowledge and research gaps still. And this is the reason that we have decided in the Commission to formulate a request to Eklipse to prepare a report on these gaps on research and knowledge in the area of biodiversity and pandemics. And this is this would be the basis for us, because we have started now preparing the next work programs for Horizon Europe, as well as the long-term strategic agenda for biodiversity research. So this information is very crucial for us to know where we need funding for the future. We in RTD, in the Commission, and other colleagues, of course, of the Commission, and me personally, we have followed all the steps for the preparation of this report, and it was really very exciting. I mean, I've seen, so many expertise and knowledge brought together, and we had all this discussion among the researchers. So I'm really happy to see the information in this report, and of course the recommendations for the next steps. I believe that this report will be a good basis for the discussions to follow up. As I told you, we are now in the preparation of the next work programs, but also for the next framework program that will follow after the Horizon Europe, which is the FP10. So with all this, I just wanted to stress the importance of this report, how happy we are that we have seen it, from the start, and now we have it in our hands to work on it, and I hope that we will continue our discussions on this issue and ensure that the funding for the next years will succeed to fill the gaps that have been identified. So thank you very much, and back to you, Niels. Thank you.
Thank you, Christina, and thank you for so many positive comments and feedback on the process, and also on the outcome of the work that Eklipse has done, and of course with huge thanks to the expert working group that has joined Eklipse for this. So absolutely wonderful. And that leads me directly, of course, now to hearing more about the work that we have done. And Julie has already put her camera on, so that's a good timing, and that's fantastic. So I would like to ask Julie Shapiro, the co-chair of the Eklipse Expert Working Group on Biodiversity and Pandemics, to give us a short presentation. Over to you, Julie. And of course, as always, you can find a short bio in the chat about Julie. Thank you.
Thank you, Niels, and I think you guys should all be able to hear me and see the presentation. Thank you so much. I'm really excited to share our results of our report on biodiversity and pandemics, interdisciplinary research and action priorities. Oh, it doesn't want to change. There we go. So just a very brief overview on Eklipse. It was an organization that was established in 2016 to help governments, institutions, businesses, and NGOs make better informed decisions when it comes to biodiversity and ecosystem services in Europe. Basically, there is a call for knowledge where requesters can submit a question that they want a response for making policy decisions, and it's a bit of a complex process, but I'm really going to be focusing on what happens within the expert working group because that's what I know best. Feel free to ask any other more detailed questions about Eklipse and the process in the Q&A. So the request that we received from a large consortium of requesters, including several of the European Commission Directorate General, including Christina's Research and Innovation, the DG Environment, DG Agriculture and Rural Development, and DG Health Emergency Preparedness Response Authority, as well as the PRESOD initiative, the One Health High-Level Expert Panel, the Norwegian Veterinary Institute, and Project Hera. And the request that was formulated along with the help of Eklipse was building on existing relevant work on research agendas and knowledge gap analysis, identify interdisciplinary research and action priorities that contribute to a strategic research agenda on biodiversity and pandemics, addressing the critical interlinkages between relevant sectors needed to make future actions more effective. So once this request was formulated, there was a call for participation in the Eklipse expert working group to work on providing an answer, providing a report on this request. And here we all are, and we were also supported by the members of the Eklipse Knowledge Coordination Body, the Methods Expert Working Group, and the Eklipse Management Body. Once we got this request, we had some time just to discuss how we were going to answer it and what does it mean. We had some interaction and feedback from the requesters as we really got down into it. But we discussed what is really meant by biodiversity and pandemics. We discussed whether we should focus these action priorities on research policy or policy relevant to research and research funding, or should we go broader? And if we go broader, just how broad? Are we talking environmental policy, agricultural policy, getting into EU trade? And what we decided based on our time frame was really to focus on research policy, but then to also include implications in our report, broader implications in the report for things like the environment and agriculture as well. So the objectives that we defined as a group were to first rapidly review the evidence and knowledge on relationships between biodiversity and pandemics, including disease emergence, not necessarily since there haven't been that many pandemics that have occurred. We looked at that a bit more broadly in terms of emerging diseases. And we wanted to review the knowledge gaps as well as policy recommendations. We wanted to synthesize knowledge of relevant ongoing research initiatives and finally validate and prioritize these identified knowledge gaps and policy recommendations via expert opinion outside of our expert working group. And so our expected outputs and outcomes were to have one single report synthesizing the result from all of these approaches, where we would summarize the current knowledge and knowledge gaps on biodiversity and pandemics, summarize existing policy recommendations on biodiversity and pandemics, evaluate how well current funding schemes and initiatives align with the needs of researchers to close those knowledge gaps. We wanted to be able to prioritize the knowledge gaps and policy recommendations for future research, and through all of this, propose recommendations for policymakers regarding the most urgent research needs, research policy and research funding in order to fill these identified gaps most efficiently. In order to do this, we had a three-pronged approach where we had a scoping review of the literature, both peer review as well as organizational reports. We did an initiative scoping and conducted a survey of experts. And then we also conducted a focus group discussion with several selected survey participants. And now I'm going to get right into the results of our report, which we were able to release in September. So Through our literature search, we identified over 50,000 articles for which we screened abstracts, and these were peer-reviewed articles that have been published since 2000. We ended up selecting 425 articles for data extraction to determine these knowledge gaps and policy recommendations, and we also analyzed 20 organizational reports. So these are from bodies such as the EU or the World Health Organization or the UN, and those reports published since 2020. So we ended up finding 12 main knowledge gaps, and these range from wildlife, domestic human interfaces and interactions, diagnostics, into the social impacts, into the methods for social sciences and the impacts of pandemics on society. And in our survey, we asked participants to rank these by priority. And we found really high priority, over 45% of the 121 participants in the survey pinpointing the social sciences, closely followed by wildlife, domestic human interfaces, as well as social impacts. Similarly, for our policy recommendations, we synthesized all the information from those 425 articles into 12 main points. And again, we have a broad range of topics, from governance to education and awareness, conservation, and collaboration. And here again, we asked our survey participants to prioritize, to rank these by prioritization. And here we actually see a bit more of an even split, but we see the largest, the highest prioritization for conservation, followed by monitoring, collaboration, and food systems. So we can see here that we have, that all of these topics were considered very important. And we also see this emphasis on both natural sciences as well as collaboration and social sciences. From the organizational reports, the main takeaways were that science really has to underpin the fight against biodiversity loss, as well as guide investment in nature-based and green solutions. That it's important to make the link between human activities and zoonotic disease emergence and pandemics really explicit in order to incentivize biodiversity and conservation, especially when those needs might go against certain economic interests. It's also important to emphasize the relatively low cost of prevention when compared to damage control. And again, this emphasis that comes up again and again on the importance of interdisciplinary collaboration, and here specifically to provide scientific guidance to policymakers. When we looked at the current initiatives and funding initiatives and programs, in the current state, we find that there's quite few funding sources that are really dedicated just to biodiversity and pandemics. We found a number of just one-time thematic calls. So a foundation might find this to be a priority at one moment and issue a call, but that's a one-time only event. Most of this funding is based in Europe and the United States, although many of them also do encourage outside partners in other countries, although their access to the funding can really vary by program. There's a lot of funding for pathogen surveillance right now in biodiverse regions, although this usually doesn't explicitly address the relationship between biodiversity and disease emergence. And we also noticed since 2020, there's been a creation of many networks for surveillance and pandemic prevention, but it's not always clear what the funds that have been announced will be used for precisely, or who has access to those funds. And we also wanted to emphasize there are a number of ongoing conservation initiatives that could really play into this research on biodiversity and pandemics that aren't really being leveraged as well as they could be. As far as gaps, we find that funding priorities change very quickly. So again, with these one-time thematic calls, 1 year, it might be very important to do research on biodiversity and pandemics, and then that falls to the side when there are other priorities. A lot of the funding is still in silos. We find that the social sciences are really unequal partners and are not given the same stature and importance as the natural sciences. The duration of most of this funding is about 2 to 3 years. The amounts can vary from 200,000 euros to several million euros per project. And we find that there's really limited funding for projects that are led by teams based in developing countries, or more generally countries outside of Europe and the United States. Our focus group discussion emphasized some of the points that we had previously, as well as bringing up some new topics. They talked a lot about the very important need for better diagnostics for zoonotic diseases in both humans and animals, to fully incorporate the social sciences into research on biodiversity and pandemics, the pressing need for in-depth, multi-scale, and multidisciplinary approaches. And then there was a pretty interesting discussion on how to make sure that research has impact and those pathways of using research to inform risk management systems and policy decisions. So in the big picture, our overarching, we had 4 big recommendations, and that was first, to promote the development of a science of the wildlife, domestic animal, human interface. 2, promote interdisciplinarity that integrates the social sciences and humanities into the science of the interface. 3, promote transdisciplinarity that involves local communities and civil society in the science of the interface. And finally, formulating problem-led funding calls that go beyond the current standard 3 to 5 year project cycle. So in practice, what could this look like? Well, first, we want to ensure that calls treat different relevant disciplines equally, and that the evaluation of projects includes ensuring true interdisciplinarity. So, for example, having joint PIs from the social and natural sciences to ensure equity in the way that social sciences and natural sciences are integrated within the work plans from the beginning and throughout the project. We think it's really important to have longer funding periods. 10 years, it sounds kind of crazy, but we think that this is really what's needed in order to carry out, to plan and undertake the type of research that we need to answer these questions. This would also allow us to promote interdisciplinarity and have the trust with communities to have a real transdisciplinary approach, as well as providing adequate training and support for early career researchers who will be leading the future research. It would be great to have an established fund specifically for social sciences and the humanities with a focus on biodiversity and pandemics. Funding, it's important to have funding for projects that are led by teams in lower income and often biodiverse countries outside of the EU and the US, so that they're not just partners or involved in a project, but they can really lead them. And from more of a policy perspective, it could be important to increase communication between the different EU DGs. For example, trade is such a big issue when it comes to biodiversity and pandemics, but they were not one of the requesters. And that could have been great to have. And then perhaps there are better avenues for the DGs to communicate questions, policy questions that require more research, and that could be communicated to DG Research to also help shape relevant funding calls. As the expert working group, we would be really happy to continue to work with DG Research to help construct future funding calls. And in general, beyond just our own working group, we think it would be great to have funding that really allows for follow-up engagement activities from all the Eklipse expert working groups. So with that, I went a little bit over, but thank you all for your attention. Thank you to all the co-authors on our report. I think now would be a great time if you could just turn on your cameras for a second. If anyone's interested in looking more into the report, you can follow this QR code. And also thank you to all of our survey participants and focus group participants who also helped make that report possible. And thank you.
Thank you, Julie. That was super interesting. And yeah, you can see the full team here of the expert working group. And they will be with you, of course, throughout the webinar to answer any questions. And please put them in the Q&A. Also, if you kind of keen to see the presentation that Julie made again, then we will have the recording of the webinar, including the presentation, of course, on the Alternet and Eklipse websites in the next couple of days. So as soon as possible, really. But in the next couple of days, you can see the whole presentation and the discussions again. Well, we should move on with our next agenda point, because I would like to introduce here now the moderator of the panel and open discussion, Alistair Scott from Northumbria University, Newcastle, who is also the co-chair of the Eklipse Methods Expert Group, and you will see his bio in a moment in the chat. Alistair, over to you, please.
Great, thank you, Niels, and good morning, everybody, or good afternoon for those in Central Europe. Greetings from a rather dull and wet Newcastle in the UK. It's my pleasure to facilitate and moderate the panel discussion. Before I introduce the panelists, give them a chance to introduce themselves, I just wanted to remind you of the importance of using the Q&A function as questions that have come in from our stakeholders are asked and answered. You may well have your own points to put forward. So firstly, to make sure that you do that, but secondly, to read the questions that others have asked so that you can vote on them, because at 12 o'clock, sorry, the most popular voted questions will be then read out to the panel as well. So it's a really important part of you making sure that you vote on others. So what I'd like to do, rather than go through and introduce each panelist collectively, I'm going to introduce the panel and ask them to briefly introduce themselves, but in so doing, identify what they see as the key priority for the report that, if you like, impacted most on them, and the implications, if you like, for their own work practice, if applicable. So it's my pleasure to firstly introduce Carlos dos Neves. And Carlos, if you could maybe just introduce yourself. I have a 2-minute starter here. So as they say in Mastermind, your 2 minutes starts now.
Thank you very much, Alistair, and a very good morning, afternoon to all. So on that leave, Carlos dos Neves. I am currently the Chief Scientist for the European Food Safety Authority, the organization at the EU level who supports both the Commission and the Member States with scientific-based risk assessments in the remits of food safety. And just by saying that, I guess you will quickly understand the links to both pandemics and biodiversity. But I've also had the pleasure before this, in my previous position, to be the research director for the Norwegian Veterinary Institute. So I was one of the requesters of this report. So my first word will be of thanks to the amazing work that colleagues have put together in this brainstorming moment that I think will bear its fruits. You've challenged me then to, of course, I should also do a disclaimer, which I suppose is the same for most of my colleagues, being strong One Health supporters and promoters, everything that leads into creating stronger interdisciplinarity, looking at things from an holistic, from a broader lens perspective, sounds good. Challenge is always how to go from words to actions. And here, from the many recommendations that are throughout the report, I would highlight one that's specifically close to me, which is really how to bring society, how to bring the citizen, the consumer, the nature lover, the patients to the table of science making and driving policy. And I think it's an area we have under-evaluated, but is really full of potential. So later on, if I'll get a chance, I would say something more, but this is really a breath of fresh air into the interdisciplinarity of the topic. Let's bring everyone in. And I stop here.
Perfect, with 2 seconds to go, so that's great. And if I could now introduce Lucinda Kirkpatrick, who's a lecturer in wildlife ecology at the University of Bangor. Lucinda.
Thank you very much, Alistair. And yeah, thank you for inviting me to be part of this webinar. Yeah, I'm a lecturer in wildlife ecology at Bangor University in North Wales. And my interests really lie in understanding the mechanisms that underpin zoonotic disease spillover from the individual levels, so animal behavior, movement, all the way up to the population scale and the landscape scale. And now I'm really interested in working in restoration environments. So we know that there is a strong link with biodiversity loss and landscape degradation. I want to know what happens as we try and redress that balance. And I do this as the co-lead of the Restorate project. And so from this report, yeah, I was particularly struck by the importance of including the socioeconomic sciences alongside research, because how you communicate your findings, like to understand the mechanisms of spillover is important, but we need to ensure community buy-in. We need to ensure that those results are communicated properly and over sufficient timescales to be reasonable when we think about landscape change and restoration. So again, also maybe feeds into the funding mechanisms.
Great. Thank you very much, Lucinda. With a minute to spare there, so that's excellent. My 2-minute worries obviously are worrying people. So
I normally talk too much.
If I could introduce Thomas Mettenleiter from the One Health expert panel to have his 2 minutes. Thomas, over to you.
Yeah, thanks very much, Alistair, and thanks, Lucy, for giving me 1 additional minute. Which I hopefully won't use. Yeah, my name is Thomas Mettenleiter. I used to be director of the German Federal Research Institute for Animal Health for 27 years, retired last year. I'm an animal virologist by training, and I'm co-chair of the One Health high-level expert panel, which is actually a scientific advisory panel to the quadripartite, the 4 global organizations that deal with these problems that we are discussing. That is WHO, WOA, the World Organization for Animal Health, the Food and Agriculture Organization of the United Nations, and the United Nations Environmental Program. And in this position, as co-chair of this panel, we are actually living this science policy interface. On one hand, being a panel made up of scientists. There are 26 scientists out of 24 countries globally, and giving recommendations on science and strategic developments on the global level. I mean, first of all, I join in the praise for the Eklipse team. I think it was a gargantuan task that they actually did, and taking into consideration that they just focused on one of the drivers of this important interface between animal, human, and environment. And there are definitely quite a bit more. Oleg identified 11 of them. Basically, that can tell you a lot about the complexity of the system. And what I found most impressive, and probably, I mean, for me, the most important outcome is not that it's so new and surprising, but it reaffirms or reconfirms that we need to really work on this interdisciplinarity and the transsectorality, which is still not in a way that we actually want to have that. There was the phrase was coined, breaking silos. I think it's breaking barriers pretty much that what we need to do. And in this particular aspect, I think, I mean, this thinking of this interface between wildlife, domestic animal, human, and environment, and bringing environment more prominently in this interface, and in particular in research, that would be one of my prime take-home lessons. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Thomas. Now over to Christina.
Yes, thank you. So, I mean, I have already introduced myself. I don't want to, to repeat things. So just to say that in DG Research and Innovation, we believe that biodiversity and health is a really important area, and that we need to keep funding this, because as we have seen, there are so many gaps that we need to invest in. And from this report, I mean, we are hearing you. There are things that we need to, to make better. And yeah, and I believe that all the recommendations that you came with in this report are really important. But if I had to choose one, I think that the need to strengthen the interdisciplinary research and to ensure that social and natural sciences are equally covered in this topic is very important. I think, especially as we're discussing with pandemics, with zoonotic diseases, and we've seen also what has happened with the latest pandemic. I mean, it's really, I mean, people do influence the spillovers, the spread of diseases, but also the surveillance and the prevention. So we need to be sure that that both sectors are, both sciences are covered equally. We have done now the midterm evaluation report of Horizon Europe, just to see how we are going, and it seems that in this area we're doing better than Horizon 2020, which was the previous program, but still we understand that the societal challenges need to be more effectively incorporated in the Horizon Europe. We need to do more more effort to have a further integration on this. And lastly, I just wanted to say that, which is positive in my opinion, that this openness of Horizon Europe to international cooperation is something that it has positive impact on the societal challenges globally, which helps towards this this direction. But yeah, I understand that we need to to work more on this. Thank you.
Great, thank you very much. And finally, without further ado, I'll introduce Benjamin Roche, leader of Presod.
Yes, thanks, Alistair. Hi, everyone. Very glad to be here today. So I'm Benjamin Roche. I'm a research director at the French National Research Institute for Sustainable Development in Montpellier, France. So currently traveling in Mexico. So I hope I'm looking awake enough. And I'm also a co-founder and global science leader of the Presod initiative. Presod, which is an international initiative which aims to prevent zoonotic disease emergence by combining research activities and operational activities, and which now gather more than 200 institutions through the world and 25 governments. So Presod was a requester of this Eklipse working group. And so one thing that I think is very key in this report, my friend Carlos has already highlighted this, but it's really so working together with the civil society and all the different kind of actors to develop actionable research. So I think this is one of the biggest lessons COVID-19 has told us, that research can be useful. I think we knew that, but so COVID-19 crisis has really highlighted that. But it also highlighted that the researcher has to may do something which is also more actionable, more transactionable. Researchers were very good to answer questions that nobody asked. And so now I think with this kind of report, it's also important to highlight that we may connect actually so the answer that we provide with the questions that are very useful to the society. And that's a very good way to engage all the different actors and especially the civil society. I think this is just by doing this kind of thing where research actually could be a very interesting driver for pandemic prevention, but also for sustainable development on its own. Thanks, over to you.
Great, well, thank you very much. That's a really good sort of starter for 10, because we've obviously had the key themes really of, oh dear, that's a 2-minute coming in. We've had the key themes really of the importance of interdisciplinary research, collaborative action, the connections with people and local community buy-in, and this broader angle of trying to bring the different sciences and disciplines together. So as I said at the outset, we've had a series of questions that have come in from our stakeholders. So we're going to kick off with those, and I'll ask members of the panel to come in on that. We're not going to have each question being answered by all 5 members because of the time limitations. But if a panel member feels particularly keen to come in, and I haven't asked them, if they could put their hand out, that would be great. So let's start with the first question, which is, how do the report's recommendations improve the way that research can actually feed in and impact on policy? And what different pathways could be used to maximise that research impact on policy? So perhaps I could start with Lucy on that question.
Right, thank you. Yeah, so I think the report did a really fantastic job of outlining the areas in which we feel there are knowledge gaps, or in which there are clear knowledge gaps. And that can really be used as a springboard, I think, for further research, but it also highlights the areas in which you can't build effective policy if you have questions around some of these parts. So I thought that those recommendations were really key for that. What I also thought was really important was again, this demonstration of the link between the different sciences, because like you said, like we saw from the pandemic, it didn't matter what we knew at a research level, because actually if that didn't translate through to the general public, then the effectiveness of what you know works doesn't matter. And so I think those sorts of areas are really, really important. And also, again, like to come back to this idea of the timing of funding. We know that we need better diagnostic tools. We know that we need to surveil things better. We need to be able to monitor things, but that takes money, and that takes money that can be used for other things. So you need to be able to convince people of the importance of that, convince policymakers that it's worth investing in that, and also, therefore, yeah, kind of communicate some of those findings out. And I think with what we see coming, with the amount of impetus there is now to look at nature-based solutions, we need to also know that they're effective. We need to be able to communicate that to people, and we need to know which areas to focus on in terms of looking at some of those solutions.
Great, thank you. Carlos, would you like to come in on that, please?
Thank you very much, Alistair. And I mean, Lucille already picked up a little on the aspects regarding that. This report can really inform, of course, a strategic approach to the research funding. We'll move into FP10. It's an important mechanism and tool. But I mean, I hear, and I mean, I also, of course, work for the Commission, but let's also keep in the back of our mind that despite the size of Horizon Europe, and we hope FP10 will be even bigger, it's a 10–11% of all the research funding in Europe. Huh? No, let's not forget about the member states. I mean, I'm just talking of Europe. This could be broader. So here, clearly, also, this report will benefit from impacting the research funding and strategic choices of a lot more than just the European Commission. And it will be important that we take this message back home, you know, to our capitals, and bring it to Oslo, bring it to Paris, bring it to Berlin. Let's not call this just a responsibility of the Commission. This is really a shared problem, a shared solution, and a lot of good research can be done in the member states. And here also, I would say, comes into action also the private sector and many other interest stakeholders that can make a difference. My last comment perhaps here, because you also mentioned on the question what different pathways we could use into bringing this into policy. And here I think is really I focus again on what I started, how we include society. And I mean, we are all happy here in Europe to be living in an area of the world that values the importance of democracy, but we also see the challenges being brought to it. But the voice of the people should not be underestimated. And we can lobby this report to as many politicians and bureaucrats as we can in Brussels. But let's not forget, I mean, we've just seen farmers in the streets. Let's not undervalue the power of transforming minds of citizens, of patients. We've seen how patients during COVID drove change. We see how farmers are pushing for change. Bringing really these people on board will perhaps be a different pathway from the usual one we think. You know, we send this report to RTD and we hope they make the best out of it. We send it to a few bureaucrats we know in our countries. What about the regular people out there in the streets? Can we bring them on board? That pathway will perhaps lead to more success than we might have given it value for.
Great, thank you. And that reinforces Lucy's point really, again, about how we communicate research more generally and the importance maybe of thinking about the priorities of those different target audiences. And finally, I would like to invite Christina for some comments.
Yes, thank you. I just wanted to acknowledge what Carlos said about the funding from the member states. Of course, Horizon Europe and the next FP10 program will be big, but biodiversity is only a small part of it, of this whole program. So, I mean, the possibilities for funding are there, but they're not huge, in my opinion. So we need to ensure that biodiversity is also being funded, from other sources as well. And indeed, I mean, I believe that we need to, this report could, help towards ensuring funding from other sources, like, from the member states or from other sources, so that we really dig into the problem and ensure that we fill the gaps, because I don't think that Horizon Europe or the next framework program will be able to solve all these problems identified in the report. Thank you.
Great. Thomas, you wanted to come in there.
Yeah, thank you. I just wanted to remind you that the OLAP definition of One Health is based on this famous 4 C's, which is communication, coordination, cooperation, and capacity building. And I still think that we have a lot to optimize in these particular 4 areas. I mean, both at a supranational level, but of course then down to a regional and national level as well. And I think this is re-emphasized, very drastically by the report by Eklipse. And we just heard in the introduction that this is something that is also basically can be improved at the European level as well. I mean, this is this transdisciplinarity or transsectorality that we're actually aiming at. So I think, this is a very important point that we should keep in mind. We all know that resources are limited. So, we are the ones that really have to make sure that the limited resources are being spent the best way that we can actually imagine. Thank you.
Okay, let's move on to the next question, because I'm aware that time is pressing. But what science outputs do the panel consider to be most helpful, in the broadest sense, in pushing the government's governmental and societal adoption of the report recommendations? So let me just report that, because my computer on the other side just suddenly died. I don't know why, it shouldn't have done. So it's what science outputs do the panel consider to be most helpful in pushing governmental and societal adoption of the report's main recommendations? And perhaps Benjamin, over to you first.
Yes, thanks. So actually, first, I think all research output should be pivotal to for governments to develop their strategic approach to develop this 1F approach. But I think something which is very important is really to demonstrate the efficiency of this 1F approach, because 1F approach has been popularized a lot since COVID-19 with a lot of advertising, if I can say, about this approach. And so people who are working on that since years or even decades knew what are actually the concrete added value of this approach for pandemic prevention, for the link between biodiversity and infectious disease. But we know also that it's much broader than that. So Thomas said that also with the 1F high-level expert panel. We're not just focusing on zoonosis, it's also broader than that. So the impact could be broader than that. And so I think something that could be extremely useful is now that also the COVID-19 momentum is vanishing, because hopefully the COVID-19 burden is decreasing finally after several years. It's very important, I think, for the academic community, for researchers, and for all the different actors working on this 1F approach to show actually how efficient could be this approach, to demonstrate really what could be the concrete added value to apply such approach for government. And so we're coming back to the first part also about the inclusion of the civil society. It's so extremely important to involve civil society to really be able to operationalize the research, the One Health research that we can do, and so the output of this One Health research in order to show how efficient it could be. And so by creating like that, so some kind of success stories, or by creating narratives also about the efficiency of this One Health approach, I do believe this is how actually the governments and policymakers can really embrace actually this approach and make it more concrete in their policies. Over to you. Your mic is mute.
And perhaps, Thomas, would you like to add any comments on this?
Well, basically, I can just support what Benjamin said. I think, I mean, in terms of policymakers, it's always good to have clear examples. I mean, to have clear evidence, a clear example, and saying, I mean, look here, it's from A to B to C, and it worked. And I think we have to work on these case studies or best practice examples and show that they are actually really working. And this entails, of course, then, I mean, this kind of prevention paradoxon that we have. So if something works and things don't happen, I mean, you don't realize, of course, I mean, if they would have happened otherwise. And I think we have to transmit or transport this knowledge as well. So in the end, I think it's a matter of coming together and showing the validity of that approach. We all basically agree that it is valid, but we have to transport that. And for that, for example, also the joint plan of action of the quadripartite with the 6 action points is an important issue that says, I mean, these are 6 points. This is not all of One Health, but these are 6 points that are relevant where we can actually show that this approach can work better than not using it. Thank you.
Yeah, and maybe just a quick throw in for myself there. You've all spoken about involving local and citizens more. So what science outputs are best targeted that actually engage with them? Because at the moment there's a real potential disconnect, maybe, that we're not necessarily producing outputs that capture those people. So I was just wondering if there are any quick thoughts about how we might better engage with those audiences through the output process. Any quick thoughts from anybody, or is that merely just a personal soapbox of mine? That's open to anybody in the panel. Nobody wants to put their hand up to that one. What output, Thomas?
And basically, it has already been said. I think we need incentives for bringing, I mean, this part of science into it. I mean, so far, when we talk about the discussions today, this is pretty much the human-animal side, basically. I mean, with some more environment, and one of the 6 action points of the joint plan of action is bringing in environment into One Health, where I think this is an integral part of it. And so, I mean, the social sciences and the humanities should also just be an integral part of that. I mean, of course, this can be incentivized by, I mean, putting out programs and saying, I mean, funding prerequisite is bringing in this part at a prominent page. And I think, I mean, this is something that funding agencies have in their own hands to do that. And I can just remind or remember when we started our research platform on zoonotic infections in Germany. I mean, one of the prerequisites for funding of the consortia was bringing in human health and animal health. And without this combination, there was no funding, period. It sounds trivial, but I think, I mean, this is definitely a way forward. This is not the only way. I mean, we need to have a change in mind as well, but this probably helps in implementing what we really want to have. Thank you.
Thank you. And Lucy, just a quick point.
Yeah, I was just thinking it's also maybe important to think about the kinds of groups that you're communicating to involve young people more, to look at different methods of how we actually communicate these findings or these changes that we know that we need. Because biodiversity at the moment is almost seen as a kind of free thing, and we can just trash it and it doesn't matter, but that's not the case. And it's young people who are going to be inheriting this world anyway, and it's their voices that I think can also make the most difference, considering how much false information they are given, or everyone is given all the time from social media. And that's what we need to try and combat. And probably social sciences, psychologists, these are the people who can provide those answers. I know it certainly wouldn't come from my background, but we need it.
Okay. Can I just move? I know Ben, you did have your Benjamin, you did have your hand up. Just try to get the last question in as a quick round robin for people. So the final question here is really around the transdisciplinary processes. So it builds really from what we've been saying. What could transdisciplinary processes induce? How can we improve the way that transdisciplinary research is actually taken out? A lot of people claim it, but in tackling the links between biodiversity and pandemics, it's come through strong within the report. But how do we translate the rhetoric into really meaningful action, both in research and policy? So over to, well, as Benjamin, you had your hand up. Could I ask you first on that one, possibly?
Sure. Actually, I wanted to jump in on the previous question, but so just very quickly on that, I think it's also regarding how to engage people. I think so. One of the 4 C's is very important. So communication towards different actors is something very important and crucial to engage the different actors. And I think so. Come back to your question, Alistair. How can we promote this kind of transparency, and how can we actually improve actors' engagement and transdisciplinary, transsectorality between the different actors? I think it goes through really, so first, some kind of co-design of research program, of operational activities in order to involve everybody at the very beginning of the process. I think it's very important because it can really increase the acceptability of this kind of program or project that we can develop all together. And we've seen with COVID-19 that acceptability could be a very complicated issue. Compliance to different kind of strategies and so on and so forth. That's something very complicated. After that, a couple of things also what the report highlights that may look actually technical, but actually they are not technical. So I think the first one is really about data. So data sharing, data interoperability. This is something very crucial. So it looks like some kind of geek things and people are playing with data, but it's much more deeper and complex than that. Because we're talking about data from environmental health, animal health, human health, different kind of ownership, different kind of data collection process at a different spatial scale, temporal scale, different legal issues, ethic issues. So that's a very, very complicated area. And I do believe that if we really want to promote this kind of real transdisciplinarity, we really need to move forward very concretely on that, because it's something that is crucially missing now. Despite the fact that we have actually a lot of efforts now to do this kind of thing. And so the last point, also, just very quickly, I promise, is also how to characterize these cross benefits with for something else that human health. Human health is a very powerful lever. But so this kind of research can have a lot of application for biodiversity conservation, for climate change, and so on and so forth, for human well-being on its own. And so that's very important also to highlight these kind of things, because I think this is how we can really improve transdiscipline. I'm over to you, Alistair.
Great. And Carlos, you'd like to come in there?
Yeah, thank you very much. I mean, what could it induce? I mean, I think already Thomas mentioned it, and I think also Benjamin now a little. It would really induce, if it really works, a change of mind. I mean, in IPAS, we call it this transformative change, you know, a change of how we do the stuff. And if I could be a little provocative, I mean, not everything is general, but if intertransdisciplinary is just, you know, and we see it sometimes, adding 2 more million to the research call, which means there is a work package 7 on social sciences. In my fields of risk assessment is to bring a few new disciplines, and we had another 100 pages to the opinion. And policymakers will probably also add 2 more ministries into the next policy. Better than nothing, but we're not there. I mean, that's not the real transformation we want. And Benjamin mentioned co-creation, co-evolution, and co-change, you know, really challenging the way we look at the problems. And it would allow new perspectives. Benjamin was also hinting that this may allow, and it's also, of course, an important part of the One Health approach, and Oleg has already mentioned it, also a little change of this anthropocentric view of all the problems. And if we can really see the links, perhaps understanding that for once, biodiversity should stay at the center rather than you will actually reach your goals quicker. because if you keep focusing on just the anthropos, on us, we usually are already the last chain, and when it gets to us, it's already too late. We've already failed to intervene in the livestock, we failed to intervene in the wildlife, we failed to intervene in the bio ecosystem, we failed to intervene in the climate change. So let's focus on your health and the money we're going to spend now. If we change this narrative, then we can induce change, and that would be transformation. That would be interdisciplinarity. And my last thing would say that would be linking silos. I'm a little skeptical to this breaking silos. We all work in our specialty. You know, I'm also a virologist, and I know 2 or 3 viruses. Well, the rest I pretend to know. I'm silos, but if I can link to other silos, mission impossible, suddenly successful.
Okay, so linking, not breaking silos. Christina, then Lucinda, very quickly, if we could, because of the time.
Yes, thank you. And from our side in the Commission, what I wanted to say is that we're trying, to deal with this issue. And at least in the last years, in the calls of Horizon Europe, we have as a requirement to include in the proposals references and to cover the social science and humanities, and all these are being covered in the evaluation. So this is something that we need to continue doing to ensure that these areas are very well presented in the projects to be funded, and then to break some silos that we have indeed in these areas. So this is something to continue. Thank you.
Okay, and Lucinda, if I could just throw in from a question from Sylvia Petrovan, really, which builds on what's being said about involving social sciences. But if we're trying to do lots and lots of different things involving lots of different sciences, how do we achieve that balance so we don't get that dilution between all the different disciplines fighting for their share of a budget? So I was just wondering, building from what's previously been said, is there a way that we can get around that dilution effect and lowest common denominator?
Yeah, well, I think it's a challenge, right? Because everybody wants their own piece of the pie, and everybody will see their own part that they're working on as the most important. But I think the COVID pandemic very clearly showed that it doesn't matter what research you do at the ground level. If you cannot communicate and to people, then it means nothing. And so I think it very clearly shows that these discussions, these interdisciplinary relationships, they need to be set up from the beginning. And if we start building that in, if we keep pushing and pushing and pushing, then the young researchers coming through will just see that as the norm, that is how you work, that you don't work on your own little thing, that we try and work across these disciplines. Also things like bringing in new technology, like all of those kinds of things. But I also wanted to just quickly say that I think it's also a branding issue, right? Like nature-based solutions are becoming extremely popular. You see them everywhere now. They're being really sold as something very positive, and that's fantastic. But One Health is very rarely mentioned in terms of ecosystem health or biodiversity, or like how that feeds into our health above and beyond maybe mental health or physical health from pollution, that kind of thing. And there I think I see an enormous potential opportunity for improving the branding kind of approach as well.
Thank you, Lucy. And Thomas, very quickly, I see your hands up there.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, now we're talking about linking silos or breaking silos. I think it's breaking barriers, what we really have to do. But on the other hand, I mean, it would be best if there weren't no barriers. So basically, I think what we have to aim at is, I mean, getting this One Health approach and I mean, this interdisciplinarity also early into education. I mean, this change of mind can only happen if we do it early in the education. It doesn't work, and I think we all agree on that once you are on the more senior side, because then you're already in the system. So I think, I mean, this focus on education, on bringing this educational issue to the forefront, including, of course, then also the humanities and social sciences, whatever, so that it's really a theory of change of mind. I think, I mean, this is the major challenge that we have. And I mean, we are also all agree that, I mean, we are talking about this situation now because of the pandemic. I mean, this window of opportunity is about to close. So I think, I mean, we have to make it clear and we have to make it fast, that we can really, I mean, use this momentum to a certain extent and bring this change. Thank you.
Okay, so that's a great call for action for any academics in the audience here as well, in the courses and modules that they design, to make sure that we actually have much more integration across those disciplines. Ironically, all too often, faculties and structures in academia actually prevent the very collaboration that we're actually calling for. But that's another matter. Let's, I know we're 10 minutes slightly over for the questions from the audience. We've had some Q&As coming in. I know there was a 1 o'clock limit. Please, if you have other questions, keep them coming in, given what you've heard. But I'd like to feed in a question from Suzanne Bastian. So entirely up to anybody to elect to answer this. So the question is, how aligned are research programs on biodiversity and conservation per se, and those focused on the prevention of disease? I don't know if anybody there would like to elect on this. Is it more of a specialist ones looking at really how many of these research programs are currently in their silos, as opposed to where are those links? Where are those links starting to emerge? Any thoughts or observations from the panel? Or dare I say, I can exercise moderator skills and allow anybody from the expert working group if they feel confident in answering that. Lucy first and then Christina.
Yeah, I just want to say, I think that there are opportunities that you see more and more now where like when you are looking at grants that are specifically for biodiversity, that thinking about some of this sort of zoonotic spillover aspect can be interesting. But I think it's important that you don't also take away funding that is meant to be targeted towards just increasing biodiversity. So it's a balance to know how best you should do it. And of course, the answer is always, well, more funding would be ideal. But yeah, that's not realistic.
Okay, thank you. And Christina.
Yeah, and just to continue with what Lucy said, I mean, we have a specific call the last years on biodiversity and health and pandemics and zoonotic diseases. And you know that we have 2 projects, a very promising project starting now, the Restorite and Zoe, which will be dealing exactly on this issue. This is a new area for Horizon Europe, but it's there. It's there. I mean, and we have managed to make the connection between biodiversity and health. And as I said before, this is something that it will continue, because especially after the pandemics, we see now, and now with, of course, the report that we're discussing today, we know that there are many gaps and many needs. And as I said, of course, the resources are not big, but they're there. So at least from our side, we're trying to have these important areas combined, biodiversity and health.
Great, thank you very much. We're getting an anonymous question in here. So there's an anonymous question I'd just like to throw in here. What measures should be taken to mitigate the impact of future pandemics on vulnerable communities? Any thoughts on that particular question? What measures should be taken to mitigate the impact of future pandemics on vulnerable communities? So much more of a proactive thinking here, maybe more practically based. Any? Benjamin?
Yeah, I try to have a go on that. So I think there are 2 things. So that's depend on which phase we are focusing on. Of course, so I'm, of course, convinced by, implementation of prevention strategies and primary prevention strategies, are very important to design, co-design and co-implement now. So before we have a crisis and not after. So that's, we have always this kind of panic and neglect cycle. So we have a huge panic when we have something big, and after one is vanishing. So we one crisis is chasing the other one. So that's of course there are a lot of crises over the world. So we can also of course understand that. But I think also it already goes a bit further than so just the scope of this Eklipse report. But equitable access to healthcare is also something which is dramatically important, and especially in low and middle income countries. So it goes much beyond that, just the link. Well, not necessarily actually, because it's also linked with the biodiversity and deforestation process. So yeah, my answer will be to really be proactive on these two kind of things. So for prevention, so really co-designing, complementing prevention strategies, and finding ways actually to improve healthcare access in low and middle income countries, because this vulnerable population will be mostly located in these areas. Over to you.
Great, thank you. And Carlos, followed by Thomas.
Yeah, very quickly. I mean, and here perhaps a little more on the political or less philosophical aspect. I think the first thing is to put these communities at the center of the discussion. And to realize that they have unique specificities, challenges that we should try to understand with them. And this is to avoid, sometimes the idea that, the North tells the South how to do it, or for that matter, the rich European country to the less developed European country. So this co-creation, I think Benjamin had mentioned here before, should also be at the center here. What do they need? How do they perceive it? And if we're going to design these policies, whether it's healthcare or better surveillance system or target surveillance systems or education, as I think also Thomas mentioned, is really to understand with them what is feasible, what's implementable, what adds more value. I don't think any of us here is perhaps representing any of this targeted community. So it's a good example that this discussion would need those people at the table as well. So it's really important to keep that in mind as we embark in these discussions, so that we don't start on the wrong foot.
Right, and Thomas.
Yeah, thank you. It hasn't been mentioned here before. That's why I would just like to throw it in. At the moment, negotiations for the pandemic agreement, and this entails prevention, preparedness, and response. And I mean, just looking at the evolution of the text of this agreement, which is now under the final negotiation, hopefully, tells us a lot about, the development and the inclusion of these particular issues. And I think this could be a very prominent leap forward, actually, in several of the questions that we were discussing today. So let's keep fingers crossed that it works out well. Thank you.
Okay, and Christina, your hand's up.
Yes, and just to mention that for us, it's also important in the consortia of the projects that implement, these new ideas, innovations on biodiversity and pandemics, to have people, to have universities or even governments, ministries from these countries as well. And we see it, this is the case with the new two projects that I mentioned, where we see that we have people also from developing countries where there are biodiversity hotspots, where they learn and they share, the experience from other members of the consortia. So this is something that we encourage, and yeah, we are very happy that we see it happening.
Great, thank you. And we have another question that's just come through. Excuse me, looking away at another screen, but it's I think it's anonymous, but it's partly associated with this. But what tools or strategies are needed to address the wildlife trade, specifically to minimize the risk of zoonotic spillover events? Specific one on tools and strategies. Any volunteers to take that one to begin with? Lucy.
So I think really it's at two levels that you need to be thinking. There is the kind of the high level where you want to try and control what's happening, where you need stronger legislation for some of the wildlife trade activities that we see occurring, but they occur because of specific reasons at the local sites where it's happening. And there, I think it's really important that you address some of those reasons for why people are turning to wildlife trade. Most of the time, it's because of economic constraints, it's because of challenges that they have within their own environment. And therefore, if you want to try and address some of those, whatever you do has to be sensitive to those needs. You can't say we're going to improve your environment, we're going to do X, Y, Z. Oh, but you can't access it, so you can't access those resources. You run the risk of shifting whatever activity that's problematic into another area anyway. And I think wildlife trade is a really key example of that. Like there's a global level that obviously needs a lot of legislation and control, but there is an underlying socioeconomic drivers that absolutely have to be addressed if you want to be effective in controlling it.
Okay. Anybody else from the panel like to come in there? I think I took the...
Carlos, no, yeah. I mean, as a wildlife researcher myself, I mean, I think what Lucinda, I mean, this actually links very well. The last question was about the low-risk communities. Yes, again, there is no simple solution to solve the entire wildlife trade. So it's really important to look into perceptions and create space. I mean, space in action. Some people will indeed need to have regulation forbidding it and not enforcing it. But this will not help if it's a wildlife trade and a subsistency community that lives from this from generations. We may need to find other solutions, other economic viable solutions for these people. While perhaps in Europe, you know, if you want to have a Komodo dragon because the neighbor has an iguana, we are talking, yes, we can forbid it. Then you move to the parallel black market. So here we still have a cultural and educational problem at the table. And these need to be addressed side by side with regulation. Otherwise, the regulation will do what it can and create a parallel problem. So yeah, I very much second what Lucinda mentioned. Let's look at it from the different angles and the different people.
Yeah, well, I just have time for one very quick one that's just come through, but it's, I mean, where's it gone now? It's just come off. Yeah, there's a lot of talk about new initiatives in, you know, working with affect indigenous populations, local communities, improving the way that we communicate. We obviously have the existing programs and funds. Is there scope and opportunities? Does the panel think that there are opportunity spaces for new money that can actually better address this? Or is it a question of simply reforming the existing fundings that programs that we currently have? Where do you think new money might come from? Or is it indeed needed? Thoughts very quickly. As I say, we've got 2 minutes. So we've got 2 minutes in total. Lucinda. Sorry, Lucy, beg your pardon.
I guess if I was to think about this, I think that there are opportunities with, like we discussed already, with trade and with business and with looking outside of simply policy and research to address some of these issues and to think about fund some of these issues, because ultimately everything is interlinked and we are relying on goods from these areas. We are relying on, it's all linked, right? So I think if we also look outside there, maybe there are opportunities to have in these areas that might help readdress some of the imbalance.
Okay, great. And Christina, I think Carlos, you had your sort of hand up. I wasn't sure, but Christina and Carlos, very quickly, please.
Yeah, just I cannot say, you know, about the new funding. I mean, I'm talking about Horizon Europe now and the next FP10, but I just wanted to say that our aim, our goal in RTD is to ensure that biodiversity is mainstreamed into other clusters, into other areas. And there we have an issue because, as you might know, we have a target with Horizon Europe to reach the spending on biodiversity up to 10%, which is to reflect the MFF goal. And there, I think that we will have problems to reach this goal. I mean, we are doing well with the 7.5%, which was the goal for 2024. Okay, there we're fine. But for the 10%, I think that we need more effort because we see that there are a lot of calls and topics in other areas where biodiversity could be there, but it's not. So we need to work inside harder to ensure that biodiversity also mainstreamed. So, and by this way, we ensure more funding as well. Thank you.
Right, thank you. And Carlos, very quickly there. Thank you.
I mean, first, let's use what we have the best possible way. That's important. And that would already be a big step forward. But I think also the pandemic, the report shows, and the report in the last 3 years of pandemic shows something that perhaps we need to also bring to the table. It is in the best interest of a lot of the private stakeholders and private part of this equation to invest more. Few billions looked a very high price to pay for biodiversity. After losing a few trillion, we may have a mind shift. Thomas mentioned that that window is closing. Let's use that. So if you want something new, let's engage more with a type of funding that has perhaps been skeptical of the return of investment. Perhaps now they will think it's a good investment to look into biodiversity.
Great. Thank you. Thank you very much. And can I thank all the panel for fielding the questions. And I'm not sure if people can open their mics to do various things, but I'm sure on behalf of Eklipse, I'd like to thank all of you at the panel for this. And back to Niels. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I agree, Alistair. That was a really fascinating discussion, and thank you very much all for your views on this. And thank you, Alistair, for also guiding everyone through this so well, and keeping on time, of course, as well. So thank you very much. We would like to come to the last part of this webinar, and for this, I will ask my colleague Serge Moran for a kind of closure statement. He's part of the Eklipse Knowledge Coordination Body, and he's the focal point of this request. He's also the head of the new International Research Laboratory for Health, Deep Health, Disease, Ecology, Environment, and Policy. Serge, over to you.
Thank you very much, Niels, and it's very difficult task to conclude after this quite amazing and very, very good webinar. Really thanks to everybody, of course, the animators like Niels and Alistair, but of course our expert panel working group and our requester that was very engaged. And just to tell you a little bit, this starting now already 3 years ago, is the 27th of February 2021 that I received a confirmation that I will join the KCB, the Knowledge Coordination Body, to manage a little bit, to manage this request first by the European Commission. And it was a really great moment for me, very engagement. First, because of course Eklipse is a fantastic program, fantastic team to manage all of this and to engage with a very nice framework that has been explained before by Julie. It was very great. Of course, the starting point was, and it was quite challenging, it was really to gather the good requesters on the top of the European Commission, and especially the research, the DG Research and Innovation with Christina, and we were quite happy. You see, all today we had some other requesters that was very important. I want to thank them because it was very important, their work and the workshop we did just to find to tune the questions, and to actually after to send the call for expert working group to finally have something to develop and to tackle. And after, it was also another way, a very good and very entertaining moment working with all these expert working group, very diverse, with very different kind of knowledge, but all very engaged and giving all their time in kind to work on this, and we're quite amazing. And of course, thanks to the support of the MEG, the method expert group, and you have today Niels and Alistair that was really there to help all the time, to turn and to improve all the time the work. So the expert working group also learn during this process. It was really a co-learning approach. Everybody, the requester, the KCB, and the methodological expert on the expert working group. And finally, this report was coming up, and I would have said that, as you've seen today, this report has already had an impact on the European Commission policy, especially by these funding schemes. It was very clear, and it will continue on this. And this report will also have a supplementary impact. I have to say now there is a new working group of experts, especially to make better integration of the One Health approach that we have discussing into the governance of the European Commission. That is still a little bit in silos that we have already recognized during the work with the request and the work with the different DGs. So it's very, very, very engaging for all of this. So I finish now, but I want, last for least, really thanks two very important persons that was really key to manage and to give the good atmosphere. I would say Carla and Candice. Thanks very much to both of you for your help and for all of this process. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ted. That was super good to get your views on this and also to get a summary of the webinar. Candice and Carla, please switch on your video so we can all kind of give you a very much thanks. And yeah, it's been absolutely wonderful. Would have not been possible without you. And I think Candice is, I would say, went very smoothly today. So a very big thank you to you, especially for doing all the notes. It's been fantastic. So both of you and the entire Eklipse team. Thank you very much. And that leaves me with wishing you a wonderful day today. And we hope to see you sometimes very soon with further discussions and involvement with Eklipse. Thank you for everyone. It's been absolutely wonderful. Okay, bye-bye.